We normally do these in the morning. I'm not used to an afternoon one. Right, let me get going because I know we've got a lot to cover in 1 hour and we've got some amazing speakers. So welcome everyone. My name's Holly. I'm the MD of BIMA. Welcome to a BIMA Hangout in partnership with WP Engine. We've been working with them for a while. They provide managed WordPress hosting to power incredible digital experiences, which is what we're all about after all. So as always, before we get into it, I just want to give those of you who are less familiar with BIMA a bit of a heads up. So BIMA is the largest digital and tech community in the UK. We represent digital talent wherever it is. So that's a lot of agencies of various types and sizes, tech companies, little and gigantic, brands, so in-house marketing and digital teams, and academia, pretty much everything in between too. So, you know, the common theme is that all of them are committed to creating outstanding digital experiences. And by being part of the BIMA community, they're all committed to driving the future of digital. So we do that in many, many different ways. We have 21 different councils that are really driving everything that we do at BIMA. It's sessions on masterclasses, sessions like this, various different programs, but all of it is about developing knowledge, best practice, case studies to support innovation, upskilling our current generation and future generations of digital talent, helping leaders with their challenges and helping them to grow their businesses, and then generally helping our members become more sustainable, more diverse, more inclusive, more interesting places to be. There are 2 shout outs I have to give today. One is the BIMA conference. So that is being run on the 18th and 19th of November. It's entitled Lessons for the Future, which we've had many this year. And all members are invited for free. So if you are a member, please use our Slack or message our team today, and you can get a BIMA promo code so you can register for free. The other one is Digital Day, which is our annual schools program. It is running virtually this year, very differently to previous years, but it's an amazing opportunity to inspire, I would say, school students all around the UK on the opportunities in digital. We already have 7,000 students signed up to take part in November, but we want more. We want to hit 10,000. So if you are anywhere near a school, if you know them, don't go up to random schools, but please do get them to sign up to this initiative. It's really low resource. It's really easy from a teacher's perspective. And it's really inspirational for students. It's for year 6 in primary and above. So absolutely primary and secondary school, all good. And I can see that Ant, our communities manager, is chatting some more information now. So on to today. So this is the 3rd session we've run with WP Engine on Gen Z, and I would probably say the most critical. So we all know Gen Z is defined and shaped by digital, but in return, Gen Z, it's not the first time we'll stumble over that today, I'm sure, defines digital for everyone else. And obviously 2020 has been this incredibly tumultuous year for everyone, but I would say Gen Z specifically. So, coming of age in this incredibly difficult time during time of COVID, this huge pandemic, the little job security they have, the sorts of protests that have happened around the world, the sorts of police brutality which is happening now. And I know Rani will speak to that later. So it's going to be a really, really interesting session. That's completely enough of me. I'm going to introduce you to our host for today, Helen Wallace. Helen is Global Lead for Adobe Creative Cloud at Deloitte Digital. Hey, Helen.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you so much for asking me to host this session. It's really exciting. I've not done one of these before, so this is a new thing for me. And I'm really glad to be taking part and getting together such a great group of speakers today. It's going to be quite exciting. I'm just going to introduce who we've got today very quickly. We've got Law, Lloyd, Rani, and James. And I'm just going to ask them to
ourselves in that order.
Sorry, the line went.
If you like, Law, yep.
A bit of guesswork through the dodgy line there. Hey, I'm Law. I'm Global Head of Cultural Insights here at We Are Social, which is a global digital and social media agency. And I specialise in Gen Z and social media usage.
Thank you. Lloyd?
Hi everyone, I'm Lloyd Tuckey. I'm the Head of Technology at Digitas UK. So I oversee all of the production from our technical engineering and ops teams and enable the connected experiences that we provide for clients.
Thank you. Rani?
Hi everyone, I'm Rani Patel-Williams, business partner at Liberty. Liberty is a youth marketing agency focused on building a better future with the next generation and with brands. I'm also the co-founder of Brand Share the Mic, which is a platform that seeks to get brands to amplify young Black voices by handing over their Instagram channels. And I'm also the founder of Gen Z non-gendered fashion accessories brand Hangouts.
Thank you. And last but not least, James, who's going to introduce himself and then talk through the report.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Helen. Nice to meet you all. Yes, James Hall from WP Engine. My role here is Agency Alliances Lead within EMEA. So I get to work with a bunch of great agencies to help them and their customers to utilize WordPress as much as they possibly can. And if you don't know WP Engine, it's the leading WordPress platform out there today. So yes, I will get started with our presentation. So bear with me while I fire up the deck on my screen. Helen, can you just let me know if you can see the screen and the slides?
Yeah, it's fine. It's all good.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've got a little around 15 minutes here to talk you through our third iteration of our Gen Z study. Typically, this would usually take about half an hour or so. So I've picked the best and the most relevant points that I think are going to be useful for our discussion today. But what I will say up front is that this study is going to be available for you to download on our website. Should you guys want to go into the full study and the full data that sits behind this. So whilst we are focusing on Gen Z, I wanted to highlight that we have actually surveyed 3 other generations as part of this study. And that's so we can see the different viewpoints from the 30 questions that we've actually asked all the participants. And it's probably useful for us just to highlight who those generation groups are and really what does it make to be in a certain generation, because it's not just necessarily about the age span. There are seminal events that maybe have served to galvanize these particular generation bands. So we've got here the oldest generation in this group set is baby boomers, who were born from 1946, when there was a rise in birth rates post World War II, and that birth rate stayed pretty high until like the mid 60s, when birth control became more common. And you would have seen this generation type get a little bit more prosperity post World War II, post the Depression in the 30s, and you would have seen moon landings and similar such as advancements in technology and sort of the ability of what we can achieve as mankind. So it was quite an aspirational generation. You then move into Gen X, which are those born from 1965 through to 1976. Interestingly, this is the last generation to purely experience an analog childhood. They would have also grown up in a time where pop music became a lot more common. So more of a sort of a I guess a liberal lifestyle would have started to emerge. Then you've come into the era of the millennials, which is from 1977 to 1995. It's the generation that comes of age as the internet comes of age, also dubbed the Untitled generation, and also the generation that would have been perhaps most impacted by events like 9/11, because these guys would have been in their sort of young sort of teenage years, and a global event like that would have had a huge impact on how they see the world. We then have Gen Z, who are the youngest generation in this set, not the youngest generation on the planet, that's Generation Alpha, but we're talking about those born from 1996 through to 2015. And so this is the digital generation. They don't know a time before the internet, and we talk a lot about their different sort of characteristics and viewpoints through this presentation. So we've carried out the study in 4 different territories. You can see the flags here across the bottom. So the US, down in Australia, and we've covered it across Europe and the UK. And what I'm going to do is just hone in on the 1,500 participants that actually took part of the study from within inside Europe. So 58% of those are actually from the United Kingdom. We've partnered with the Centre of Generational Kinetics to actually carry out this study. They are the leaders in this field, and what they help us do is not only construct 30 questions that are best to ask this audience to get the right type of data that we need, but also to make sure we're mapping as close as we possibly can to the census data in those territories. So you can see here that we've got a near on sort of 50-50 split males to females, but also on the right hand side in that pie chart is the demographic breakdown of the generations. So 17% of the respondents were from Gen Z, and then you can see the others there in terms of 42% from millennials, 28% from Gen X, and 13% from boomers. So we've packaged up the results here into 2 areas. So we're going to look at how we identify Gen Z and how they identify themselves, and what kind of influence do they have over themselves, over the markets, over the other generations. So let's dig into their identity and how it is different from other generations. The first question we asked was, how long could you comfortably go without accessing the internet? And perhaps not surprisingly to find out, it was actually 60% of Gen Z could go no more than 4 hours without access to the internet, which when you think about on the other end of the spectrum here, that 26% of boomers could go more than 2 days. And of that, 14% could go more than a week. So there is already a stark difference there between the youngest generation as opposed to the oldest generation in this data set. What are they doing on the internet? Well, a lot of time they like to be open and very transparent about the things that they're doing. So when we ask them, how often do you share videos and images and memes and selfies, you can see here that these are big percentage grades in terms of how open they are to sharing what they're up to. And I think that's the first thing really as businesses that we've got to take on board is, if they're going to be open and transparent about what they do, how do we do that as well in terms of the data that we're using as well to try to personalize the experience for them. And I know we're going to cover more of that later on. We are seeing that this generation are a cohort of creators. They no longer want to just participate in a conversation or an online experience. They want to create that experience, be that in the gaming world, be that with video, photos, whether it's vlogging or podcasts. They are sort of ahead of the other generations in terms of their openness and willingness to create content. And it's not just about creating content itself. They are a generation that is quite open to teaching themselves and building their own experiences. So YouTube, for example, is a very commonly used platform for Gen Z in order to allow themselves to build knowledge, whether that be in a specific hobby or sport or genre, or actually supporting their own education. They're out there building digital worlds in Minecraft, and also, obviously creating their personal brands on social platforms like TikTok and Instagram. But interestingly, they are building a web presence as well, and have their own sort of sites. And we asked the question, have you ever used WordPress? And you can see here that sort of 67% of the correspondents came back and said that yes, they had. I think that's quite fascinating. You're talking about a very young audience here, the oldest being sort of 23 or 24, and they've got a comprehension and actually are utilizing content management systems in order to create experiences. So they're very savvy as a generation. This is something you probably expect, right? The youngest generations in terms of Gen Z and millennials are most willing to either start or probably consider starting their own business compared to the older generations, because the older generations are obviously fairly set into their careers at this point in time. But what is interesting is we're still seeing that 59% of Gen Z are still wanting to start their own business and have a very entrepreneurial mindset as to perhaps fall in line and join another company. And I think where we are right now, with being a huge amount of digital change and the fact that there's going to be probably an increase in unemployment going forward, does this spark opportunities for Gen Z to latch onto their entrepreneurial spirit to try and find breakthroughs in the market? It could be quite an interesting time going forward, and no doubt we'll debate this more. By and large, the internet is seen as a force for good. We asked the question here, and this is the response of 78% of Gen Z and 70% of boomers, so it's not just the young here, believe that the internet has made a good job of connecting people together. And I should say that the data we've captured from this study was actually done around about this time last year, and we released the results in 2020. But I'd love to see what that stat looks like a year on, after everything that we've gone through this year. I'm sure that that would have probably gone up. And here we have 63% of Gen Z compared to 42% of boomers think the use of artificial intelligence will have a positive impact in the world. So we're starting to see like a slight difference there in terms of the younger generation feeling like this new age technology around data and personalization will have a positive impact versus maybe a few more of the skeptical older generations. There is a sense now that having a digital presence and digital representation of self allows this generation to achieve more and be more expressive. 74% of Gen Z believe they can be part of a social movement, even if they only participate through social media. And also that 57% of Gen Z is more likely to disagree with someone or an organization online than they are actually to do so in person. This is quite interesting. This is a generation that would rather fit in than stand out by and large, and that brands don't necessarily define them. In fact, they have more association and affiliation with their country than they do, select brands. And you can see here that, a single brand does not define their lifestyle. Only 44% of people are saying that. We asked the question around, which values, qualities, and attributes kind of define your generation. Is it freedom? Is it equality, inclusion, social responsibility, tech savviness, diversity, and pragmatism? And across the generations, the top three were freedom, equality, and social responsibility. But freedom was the top for the millennials, the Gen Xs, and the boomers. But actually, when it came to Gen Z, equality and inclusion just pipped freedom by 1 percentage point there, showing that there is a slightly different way of thinking for this young generation. And that caps off identity. And as I say, I appreciate I've raced through a lot of the data there, but we do have this ebook that it'd be worth downloading and looking at the data in a lot more detail. The second half here of what we talk about is looking at the influence that Gen Z has and how we can sort of meet them in this digital world. The first thing we considered was, what are people using the internet for? Is it for entertainment? Is it for connecting with other people? Is it for accessing information? And as you can see, for boomers, it's very much information. Gen X, again, information. Millennials, they're kind of almost at an equilibrium, but information still taking that, that being the most common thing that they're using the internet for. And it flips for Gen Z. It's almost sort of neck and neck when it comes to actually entertainment and access to people. And it certainly is more ahead of information. So just think about that when you're trying to target this generation. Do you try and serve them information first? You try and entertain them perhaps before you do that? How can you help them, create content and connect with their networks? It's an interesting way to look at it. This is a question that's about predictiveness over having an anonymous experience with the internet when we think about going into the near future. And this is an interesting one for me, because a lot of the time we hear about the need to get to more of a personalized experience, but actually what the data is saying here is that all generations would still rather have an anonymous experience by and large than actually having it to be predictive, or they've got to open up their data sets in order for that personalization and predictiveness to occur. But the trends are, as always, that the younger generation, Gen Z, are twice as likely to want to have a predictive experience than the older generation. So no doubt we're going to see this trend start to increase and go up. Yeah, it's just something to be mindful of. We wanted to find out about sort of authenticity in terms of images that are used within adverts for brands. And what came out was that all generations would prefer for customers to be used in adverts rather than models and celebrities, for example. And that's particularly true for Gen Z. As you can see here, that represents 83% of the respondents. We also said, what about then if an image is just standard, or whether it's been photoshopped? Is there a difference there too in terms of building trust to a brand? And again, 81% of Gen Z have more trust in a company when there has been no retouching as such that has happened to the images that have been used in those adverts. So again, authenticity is really big for this young generation. Here we're saying that with all generations, there is more of a likelihood that they are going to buy from a company that contributes to a social cause. So the balancing act is not about, okay, do we go for a social cause, which one? But also, like, if you get the social cause wrong, then a third of these generations could stop buying from you. They disagree with the social cause that you go with. So it is really hard. You're walking a tightrope in terms of, what social cause do you back? And you don't also want to be seen as sort of piggybacking on what other brands are doing and sort of playing it safe. What we found from the data is that if you tend to sit on the fence, then that's possibly the worst thing to do. These generations want you to back social causes ultimately. And we do know that the data is starting to tell us that those younger generations, Gen Z and millennials, are kind of more likely to be forgiving if you perhaps get it wrong, so to speak. So I think it's given you that little bit of opportunity to experiment a little bit. We wanted to find out whether there was a difference between purchasing products, no matter what it may be, from electronics through to shoes and clothes and the tickets and books and jewelry, right the way through to actually buying your takeaway food via a website versus an app. And overwhelmingly, the website is a front runner here for all generations. So it's just something to be mindful of as marketers in terms of, where do we place our budget? Where do we place our priority when we're trying to create our digital experiences today? This is a future-focused question. 61% of Gen Z think that in the next 10 years, all shopping will take place online. That's all shopping. And 61% of Gen Z, that's a high percentage. So I think the market's got to go a long way in order to get to that point. And it's not just about perhaps the front end activity. It's really about that full experience of being able to complete the delivery, the returns. The whole industry's got to really move forward there to meet quite an astonishing demand that's coming through from Gen Z. So I wanted to wrap up now and kind of just highlight briefly what we think this means, that will then hopefully open up into some nice debate. To reiterate, this is a generation that is born digitally and that it's intrinsic in everything that they do. There is now this one experience between what is digital and what is human, and it's very much sort of intertwining to become one experience. And this is a generation of influence. They are pioneers for the rest of us. And I think that this year is testament to that. Just look at what we've all had to go through as we've all had to adopt more of a digital way of life. that it's ultimately been what a lot of Gen Z have been used to be doing prior to COVID. And they're leading us through this digital change, and no doubt will continue to do so. So I hope you found that research of interest. As I say, there is an ebook that you guys can get a link to. No doubt we'll share that after this, and look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, James. I found that report so interesting, and it really shed a lot of insights into Gen Z that I think would be fantastic to talk about with the speakers here today. So I wanted to just start with one that I thought was particularly interesting. Gen Z, more than any other generation, have an always-on relationship with digital, and they're primarily turning to it for entertainment and access to their friends. And I think, you know, if that was at the time when you did this report, that's only going to be heightened at the moment with the current pandemic. And I think for some of the clients that I work with, it's putting a lot of pressure on their businesses. We're having conversations with CMOs and their marketing teams around the fact that they're having a huge increase in the velocity and the volume of content that they have to create for these very contextual and personalized experiences online. And all the time, so you've got this increasing volume, but you've got decreasing cost. They're having to drive business cost efficiencies, and that will probably be even more so next year as we face quite a lot of economic uncertainty. So I think this would be a fantastic topic to talk about. And I know Laura has some views and experiences that I think would be really valuable to hear.
Sure. So I think, especially from a kind of digital and social agency perspective, it's really common for clients to come to us asking for how they can be always on. And I think I do understand why. Obviously, Gen Z spend like all of their time scrolling, but then at the same time, something that a lot of the kind of strategy teams band around a lot in the agency and across all of the global network as well is around this idea of being always relevant rather than being always on. I think that this is especially pertinent for Gen Z because it's not even that they're always on their phones, but it's because they use their phones for every single aspect of life. If you want to figure out how to step up your diet or step up your fitness regime, or you want beauty inspiration or fashion inspiration, or you want to learn about social issues or what's going on with politics, or you want memes, or you just want to fill the time at the bus stop, like whatever it is, they spend all their time on their phones. So it's more, I think, from a brand perspective, less about being always on, but understanding what key mindsets you want to tap into, like why people would engage with your content, and then kind of doing the due diligence to understand where you can fit into that. So two great examples of that from a different angle, like Balenciaga, their Instagram is insane because they realize that young people don't necessarily enjoy engaging with brands, but in their space they enjoy engaging with influencers. So their whole feed basically looks like an extremely cool fashion person's like life, and they've obviously just gotten a really cool fashion person to actually curate the feed for them, right? So I think on that angle they're really tapping into why people would go to their feeds rather than trying to be like, you know, publishing 5 times a day, whatever.
Fantastic. I think it would be really interesting to hear a slightly different perspective on this as well. So not only around how to engage the brand, but also how can brands deliver those experiences. Lloyd, do you have any views on how technology can enable those businesses?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, if we look at the study, we see that Gen Z are very keen to receive a personalized experience, something that's going to predict what they may want, when they may want it. And the study shows that something like 40% of them will forego any security or privacy concerns, which quite frankly scares the hell out of me. But if they're willing to provide their data, they'll get a personalized experience in return. There's also a big expectation from them that AI going forward will kind of enhance that experience and provide that digital learning capability. So we're looking at a future where AI is going to be embraced, if not already, by a significant portion of Gen Z, and with the expectation that AI will enhance their digital and physical experiences. And this is good news for marketeers because recommendations and personalization has been a staple in the commerce space for years and years now. We see product recommendation or content that's personalized on multiple sites and platforms. And if more and more people are willing to trade their data for better experiences, I think we'll see companies increasingly leverage AI to interpret that data to deliver the right experience to or product to a user in real time. And for companies that have previously invested a lot of time, effort, cost, manually creating a set of personalized recommendations, I think AI will start to carry a lot of that load. And that will then enable the company or our marketeers themselves to focus on that entertainment part of the experience that's so crucial to Gen Z as well. There's still a place for manually curated content. I think we see that still. But if we see a future where people are starting to expect sites and applications to predict what they want in real time, AI can certainly be leveraged to do that cheaply in terms of effort and enhance the overall experience.
Brilliant. Do you see that businesses are already starting to adopt this way of working, or is this something that you think is in the near future?
People are definitely starting to adopt it. I mean, it was nascent a few years back, but the space in which AI is being used to deliver personalized recommendations, content, etc., is gathering at a pace. And I think we're just going to see that ramp up more and more and more over the next few years.
Great. I mean, and I think that ties in quite nicely around conversations around data. I mean, if we're going to start creating these really engaging experiences that build relationships with Generation Z, we have to get to know them, and we need to do that through data. And I think one of the interesting insights from your report is that Gen Z would prefer to have the internet and connected devices become even more predictive in the future. And that 40% of Gen Z will leave if it doesn't predict what they like and want. And for me personally, I think I found that fact quite a surprise. Maybe it's just because I'm really old and I'm not Gen Z. But I think there's a growing awareness of the commoditization of personal data. And I think people are getting way more protective and inquisitive on how their personal data is being stored and used. And I think that's highlighted through shows like the Netflix, The Great Hack. I think that's super interesting. So for me, I suppose what I wanted to ask this group is, as marketeers and as brands, how do you strike that balance where you can please everybody? You can give them that sort of preemptive experience of knowing someone without it being just plain creepy. I'm going to open that one up to Lloyd.
Thank you. So it is a fine balance, I think, between appearing to be overly creepy or intrusive versus giving somebody that prediction or that personalized experience that they may want or desire. Gen Z, I mean, they seem to be all about authenticity, relevancy, transparency, and I think that needs to be reflected in the way in which we gather their data. And they need to be assured that we're doing that data gathering in the right way. Having said that, there is a massive desire for these predictive and personalized experiences. And again, that gives marketers the opportunity to leverage that. If it's done in a way that's demonstrably and transparently relevant to that customer, I think, that's one way of getting around the potential fear. Other brands are looking at this where I think they're doubling down on not even caring so much about what the fear is and kind of testing the water around that. If you look at some of the products that Amazon have released in recent months, their latest slew of Echo devices, for example, one of them is a camera that's attached to a drone that will actually fly around your home when you're away, and you have no agency over that drone, and it will look at whatever it wants to and gather all that data. But Amazon obviously appear to think that people will want to buy that. So it'll be interesting to see where we think the line is going to be drawn and what people are willing to invite into their homes in terms of having a better experience.
Oh my goodness, the mess they would see if they flew around my house. That's for sure. I know I spoke a little bit to Rani on this particular topic. I think it's not only about how data is being used, but also where are we sourcing our data from can be really influential on how we deliver experiences. Rani, I would love to hear your views on this.
Yeah, so I think for me, I think the predictive element is clearly favored by Gen Z because it gains them so much convenience, it saves them time, and obviously they want the most snippet, efficient digital experience. And that's like at a low level when we think about like, you know, logins or kind of recommendations. I think what we need to be careful about is that how the data is used and understanding certain nuances around personal personas, because there are so many nuances that would make someone's profile slightly different to another. And some of that information and some of that data isn't always as easily accessible or easily able to kind of be defined. And I think that's where there potentially could be a challenge of this kind of getting into this creepy kind of territory that we're talking about, which is like understanding and assuming and making kind of the wrong assumptions.
Brilliant, thank you.
Sorry, just to jump in there as well, because I think something that you made me think of when you were saying about that, which I think is super interesting as well, is like, as you say, like the digital experience and how convenient it is of course what this audience is accustomed to, so that's what they want. But I think there's something in here as well where when businesses say like, oh, customers aren't creeped out by this, therefore does that mean it's fair game? I think there's something just because this audience isn't creeped out by it and is so accustomed to living in a world of Amazons and, you know, deep corporate capitalism that they're like kind of accustomed to it, doesn't mean we shouldn't be saying if customers aren't. Oh, there's an echo going around here somewhere. I think it's about like, just because customers aren't creeped out, does that mean we should be using their data unethically, and kind of making sure that we're asking the right questions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually I've got a question for the group because I don't know. Do you think that Gen Z within different regions have more different approaches to their personal data usage and their privacy? Or James, do you think this is applicable at a sort of global level?
An interesting one. We have actually done the study across different regions, so I would be able to go back and check that, but I don't know it on the fly. We are seeing that by and large there are similarities. From what I've looked at the study in the past, there are similarities across the geographical zones for sure, certainly in the Western world.
My guess on that as well would be that so for example, markets that have had later development to technology, so a lot of markets like certain parts of China and India where their first like experiences of the internet are actually their phones, and where technology can do so much to close the gap on education and inequality in lots of different ways like that. Those markets tend to be more open to technology of all kinds. So like parents in India are far more likely than parents in America, for example, to think of the internet as a positive force for good for their kids because it's about education and all of that stuff. But my guess as well would be that the more educated and wealthy a young person is, the more likely they are to have an awareness of the intricacies of data in good and bad.
Love that. That's quite interesting. And I think that kind of goes quite nicely into my next question, which is very convenient. So I love the fact that Gen Z see digital as a force for good and that they can have a part in that. I think it's really nice to see a generation that feel that they can make a difference. And they want to see brands taking a stand. So, for example, James, in your report, it cited that 74% of Gen Z believe they can be a part of a social movement, even if it's only participating in social media. And I think they're really finding their voice and their influence. So they are more likely to buy products from companies that contribute to social causes. So I think that's amazing. They have a desire for authenticity, and they believe that AI is going to have a really positive impact on the world. So that sounds super optimistic. And I think what I would like to know is, how do you see, to the group I'm going to ask, how do you see brands sort of tapping in and being instrumental in being a force for good in a way that feels really authentic to them as a brand, rather than just jumping on a Me Too movement that doesn't feel very sincere? And I'd love to ask that one to Ronnie.
Yes. So actually, before getting into like what brands can do specifically, I think Laura made a really good point on the last question, which was around, if Gen Z don't know anything different, if this is the world that they've been born into, I do believe that like them believing that AI is going to have such a positive impact is kind of based on them not knowing much difference at all. And kind of my sort of stance on this, having kind of seen how AI hasn't always been a force for good, is we've observed in the last year, for example, how pro-Black and pro-LGBT content on Instagram has been shadow banned based on the algorithm and the AI that's kind of understood that content isn't what certain audiences want to see. And there's an issue there around where the data is being collected and therefore what's it being used for. And that was an example of how Instagram essentially believed that content that was pro-Black or pro-LGBTQ didn't want to be seen, and that may be down to the fact that maybe the data was collected by from cis white consumers or audiences. A project that I worked on independently for my brand was around looking at how we could get better representation within AI, and specifically for London Fashion Week developed a CGI catwalk where collecting data from the Black diaspora allowed us to actually define the characters of the CGI models. And this was a response to the fact that CGI influencers, their tone of voice was created by kind of white studios and not actually data that informed the experiences that these CGI characters were supposedly supposed to have. I think what we've seen in the wake of George Floyd's death is also how the data that the online communities are putting out there with Black Lives Matter, such as like sharing content, reposting content, liking content, has actually informed that AI so that that content is now understood to be a priority. So when we think about what do brands need to do to contributing and using it for good, I think it's understanding that if this audience are looking for brands with purpose, and they want to see brands that are also using their platform for good and for change, they need to be collaborating and co-creating on making that content that can then also feed into these algorithms or feed into the data that's out there, because the brands have really powerful platforms and their content is prioritized to a certain extent. So for me, that's kind of me coming at a very, I guess, different angle, specifically around social and specifically around social movements online.
I think that's a really interesting point as well, in terms of thinking about the fact that, you know, this audience has grown up with brands just in their feeds mixed in with everything else. They don't, I know this really hurts for brands to hear, but they don't care about your brand. Like, they just don't care. But they do care about, yes, sometimes like they might want to buy your stuff. They might think that your logo is cool, like whatever. But the one thing that brands have that a lot of young people want, kind of coming back around to that discussion around kind of economic instability in the context of COVID, brands have reach and brands have money. And so they are two things, whether you're investing in an industry, whether you're investing in a social movement. I think something that else which is important to note is that for some brands, like going into social good isn't like, or investing in social movement, sometimes it's just not really your place. We did a study at We Are Social. So what we have a supermarket brand, and they wanted to know after Blackout Tuesday, obviously Blackout Tuesday was kind of a kick up the ass for all brands because everyone had to consider what they might say, regardless of whether they did say something or not. And the supermarket brand was like, do we want to be saying anything here? Is it our place to say anything? So we did some social listening around it, and it turned out that actually there was negative sentiment across the board when it came to a supermarket posting a black square, because it was virtue signaling. It wasn't necessarily feeding into any internal work streams. It's not investing in the actual movement. And it's like, but that doesn't mean you can't engage young people by investing in other forces of good, whether that be, nightlife culture, which is getting zero priority from government funding, but is actually very central to young people's social lives. Or, it doesn't have to be social justice. There are lots of ways you can use your money and your platform to benefit this generation. But the idea that this generation are looking to brands and kind of waiting for them to participate, I think is kind of a bit of a kind of wishful thinking, because actually if you're not doing anything interesting, they're probably not looking at you at all.
I think you're spot on there. I think it's actually finding what people really want, what this generation really wants, and sort of creating your strategies around what they're telling you they need to be involved in. And I think we're going to see that more than ever with the current economic crisis that we're about to face. And I think that is also something interesting that's been highlighted in the report as well. It worries me a little bit personally because I have children, and the average age when they graduate in the UK is 25. So it's highly likely that Gen Z are going to soon be entering the workforce at a time when unemployment is likely to be at its highest levels since 1985. And that's according to The Guardian. So I think conventional roles and careers are not going to be as easily available for this generation. It's going to be a lot tougher. And that's not just in the UK, that's pretty much across the board. So I think what's going to be really great is understanding how brands and businesses can really support and help this generation. So they've got a great self-starter, can-do spirit. They see the internet as a place where they can learn and build businesses as well. They're really entrepreneurial. They're not going to be stopped. They're a fantastic group. So, 61% of them would rather have unlimited access to the internet than a university degree. And I think that's also telling that they don't want to get into debt while learning as well, if there's job uncertainty. So how do you think marketeers and businesses at large can sort of rethink how they support this generation coming out? I think we've got an obligation. I'm going to open that one up to James.
Thank you. I think first and foremost, we're seeing a lot more of society and brands and so forth have to digitally shift. And that not only will spark innovation in itself, but I think as marketers, we need to make sure that we're investing in the ability to experiment, and that needs to be baked into budgets. And that's the easiest and natural way in order to create growth and new business off the back of that. So if you have a very entrepreneurial generation coming through that are very digitally minded, there is a chance that they're going to be able to find gaps in the market to be able to satisfy the needs of this, very much emerging and new technologies that are going to start to keep coming through. So that's the first thing I'd say that is important. I think the second thing, in terms of picking up your comment there around them being sort of a generation of self-teaching and using YouTube and content such as that, an easy way to give back would be to think about how you can actually publish content that is perhaps relevant to your brand, your industry, but also that is universal in terms of transferable skills by department, that you can actually publish that content back freely on platforms that are used by Gen Z, such as YouTube, in order to boost their education and help them maybe get their first job, because they got a little bit more experience in some of those core tools and skills that they need in order to be able to achieve that role successfully.
Thank you. I mean, I know that at Deloitte, we're doing a lot around apprenticeships as well. We're seeing a huge rise in the number of places that we're offering, not only in our firm, but also in our clients' firms. This understanding that education has become somewhat exclusive to those who can afford it. And that really needs to change, and offering or changing our views on what is the future of work. The fact that it needs to be a bit more blended, that people will need to perpetually keep learning throughout their entire careers, but also the fact that people don't necessarily want to go through the traditional educational flows or structures as they were before. It's just financially not viable for them. Yet those people still have absolutely great value to offer in the workplace, especially around diversity, making sure we get that diverse thinking inside a business is really, really critical. So I would really sort of challenge sort of brands and marketeers who are joining this, or businesses, to maybe have a think about how are you set up for the future of work, and how can you also support this generation at a time where we're going to have to rethink both education and employment. I think it would be super exciting. Love some questions on that. But that kind of is bringing us very close to the end of our session. So I just wanted to go around the table just with my final question. And it's just very quick fire. So, you know, we're at a really disruptive time in our history, both socially and with technology advances. I can't even talk, it's that exciting. So how do you predict that this is going to change the creative and marketing industry? Laura?
I think brands are going to have to like open their wallets, aren't they? I think open your purse was one of the big phrases to come off the back of the Black Lives Matter movement online, certainly this year. I think, yeah, young people are looking to brands to invest in education, invest in reform of old school institutions, invest in young people, stop talking about stuff. Just like brands are going to have to actually start spending, I think.
Rani?
Oh gosh, it's a big question, and I think a lot of it is decentralizing their marketing approach to a certain extent, in terms of working with communities and being led by them, versus this sort of like ad-lan approach and kind of linear approach of like big ideas. So I think what I mean by decentralizing it is like really starting with the community first and working out from there, I think is kind of one of my predictions.
Super. Lloyd?
From a tech perspective, I think brands, I mean, they've always had to do this to some degree, but they need to set themselves up to be able to react and adapt to unknown complexity, more so now than ever. The advances in technology that we're seeing, the convergence of technologies that are happening, whether it's AR, whether it's 5G opening up bandwidth to everybody to be able to do everything. Businesses need to be in a place to where they can leverage that effectively to deliver those experiences that, you know, the Gen Z community are after.
Thank you. And James?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take more down that sort of technology route, as Lloyd's saying. It's kind of what we see in our sector. And that is, you know, you've got to be in a position to be able to be nimble and move fast, because change happens overnight sometimes, as we've seen this year. And you need to be able to be in a position to use the best in breed technologies that are out there in order to make sure that if you're a big brand, you can turn the tanker quickly. Because I do believe we're going to see a whole wave of new businesses coming through, which is going to really continue to disrupt the marketplaces.
Great. And my final prediction is I think we're going to see a greater blurring of boundaries between work, education, and our personal lives. I think that a lot of us have seen this already, starting to work from home. The typical working hours are gone, and our personal lives intrude into certainly plenty of my Zoom conference calls. But I think this generation, more than any, will have a completely different mindset and approach to how and when and why they want to work. So I think it's going to be really exciting. And on that note, I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of the speakers who've joined here today. You've been absolutely amazing, and I've loved hearing all of your different perspectives. And I'm going to hand over now to Holly.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, everyone. That was brilliant. So we will send up a follow-up email. It will have all the details of the report that James presented and much more. If you would also like to continue the discussion, if you're a member of BIMA, please go onto our Slack channel. There are multiple channels within that where you can join the discussion. And last but not least from me, and just pertinent to the discussion around talent, is that if you are looking at the government Kickstarter program or getting involved in that, please do give me a shout, because we're looking at doing something for our members on that. So thanks again to everyone. It was a brilliant conversation, and hopefully one of many more. Have a great evening.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.